You're not going to want to mix it up with me today unless you bring the right method with you, because when your baking goes bad, there's an obvious culprit, and I'll tell you who to blame and how to fix it today on the Carefree Cook's Code. I'm Chef Todd Moore, and this is the Carefree Cook's Code, every Tuesday live at noon Eastern. Here's our challenge. How can home cooks cook freely with creativity, confidence, and pride while ignoring recipes and still impressing themselves and others with what they cook? Well, the answer is found in becoming empowered with how cooking works, using dependable and repeatable methods of cooking that work for any ingredient, for any diet, and any desire, just like chefs do. And we'll know we've cracked it when everyone sees cooking as an exciting and rewarding way to improve their relationships, their lifestyles, and their health through better food and cooking. This is the Carefree Cook's Code. Hey, welcome back to the Carefree Cook's Code, everyone. We're live every Tuesday at noon Eastern time. And look, I have a lot of people telling me, oh, I can't believe I missed that live. You know, you were there, I missed it, I know it, but I don't want you to be left out of any of my live broadcasts. So let's figure out how to set your notifications correctly. If you go to my Chef Todd Moore page here on Facebook, you see that blue button that says follow. If it's still blue, click it, please, and follow. And then when you follow Chef Todd, you can get these live notifications. Once you're following me, then you can click on this barely visible pencil that's there next to notifications. Choose standard and you'll get a notification whenever I go live on Facebook. Click done and you won't ever miss a Chef Todd live again. And also, that's for the future. If you want to go back in time for the past Carefree Cooks episodes, go to my video archive on Facebook. You can go through about 500 free videos on my YouTube channel. And now you can follow what I'm cooking for dinner along with how I did it when you follow me on Instagram as well. This is Sunday night's shrimp and scallop spaghetti primavera. Parmesan cheese, shallots, red peppers, orange peppers, yellow peppers, fresh oregano, a little splash of heavy cream. It's so good. I'll tell you how I did it on my Instagram page. How do I do it? Well, because I'm a carefree cook. I create my own recipes. I bring friends and family, or I send them food and leave it on their porch, but I learn every time I cook. I create my own cooking style because I practice pro methods and I love my cooking. And I love my baking too. Baking is big right now. My goodness, I can't believe the number of people getting back into their kitchens and finding the comfort. You know, it's just such a comfort thing. You find comfort, you find joy when you start creating baked goods. You know, it just gives you, it's just few things give you such a sense of pride as creating really cool baked goods. And, you know, I told you last week, I really wanted to be a professional baker. I was fascinated with this fact that just a few ingredients were responsible for every single thing that you can bake. But, you know, so much can go wrong before this baked good ever goes into the oven. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, I've got a true or false for you. Here it is. True or false? Tell me in the comments section below. Just one word. True or false is all we need. Speaking of things that we may need, penicillin was created from blue cheese. Is this statement true or false? All right, look, last week we talked about the fact that there are only 7 ingredients that make up all of baking. And every single thing that you ever wanted to bake is made from some combination of these seven standard ingredients. So, you know, this is, again, what baffled me. How can just 7 ingredients make everything that you can think of, right? Well, how can just a few primary colors make up every other color? Same type of thing. How can 26 letters make up every word in the English language and others? It's not the letters, it's not the colors, it's not the ingredients, it's how you mix these things together. It's the order that you put the letters in that makes something understandable, brilliant, or totally confusing, right? And how you mix items up is most important. And look, there are just 5 mixing methods. And once you know them, once you know their purpose, once you know their goal in mixing, then you'll have a pro baker's command of baking, even if you never become a pro baker like me. So let's go back. Let's review from last week the 7 ingredients from last week's Carefree Cooks Code. Do you remember EFFF-LLS? EFFF-LLS, do you remember that? Egg, flour, fat, flavor, liquid leaven or sugar? That's what you need to remember. That was the last slide that I left you with 7 days ago. But notice at the bottom of the slide, at the bottom over there, it says, with proper mixing methods, creates every baked good. With proper mixing methods. And ultimately, this is the most important aspect of baking. I mean, I know everyone else out there, everyone is teaching baking, and they're telling you that it's done by time and temperature, right? What temperature do you preheat the oven? How long is it in there? They spend no time at all on mixing. And it just comes down to how long you bake something at what temperature, hot air. Well, you know what? This is the absolute worst way to bake something. And it's the absolute wrong focus to have if you really want to be a great baker. You know, you might have heard me say it before, baking mistakes are made in the mixer, not the oven. And if you want to fix your baking mistakes, then you need to scrutinize the mixing method that you're using. And look, I'm not even going to get into the fact today that your oven is a big fat liar. That son of a toaster oven has been lying to you for years. It's been trying to mess up your cooking and baking forever. And if you don't believe me, just go get a cheap thermometer for $3 or $5, put it in there and compare what the two of them are saying. Let them fight it out. Liar, 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 scones on fire. Your oven is lying to you. So you can't bake by time and temperature if your oven isn't telling the truth. That's the idea. But these are the things that you can do to assure that you are measuring things properly. We call it scaling in the professional kitchen. Measuring and scaling precisely. That's going to go a long way. Don't just estimate and splash things around. In the science of baking, you do need to measure. How about focusing on how you mix them, combining a smooth and uniform batter? Are there lumps? Are there bumps? Are there eggshells? Are there things that are going to weigh your batter down? What about a dough? How are you incorporating air? How are you developing air cells? How do you develop gluten? How do you develop texture? How do you build the structure of the item with proteins? How do you feed your leavening agents so your baked good rises? These are the things that happen in the mixer. And they're so much more important than time and temperature in baking. So look, let's talk about the most important part of baking. The part that actually gets no heat at all. Because once you put something in the oven, bye-bye, right? You have no control over it whatsoever. Close the door, cross your fingers, and that's it. All the control in baking comes from your mixer. And look, we've already covered the 10-step yeast dough production process in my 2-part pizza making series from last week. Go back and watch that because it was really, really cool. We had hundreds of people on live at the time. It's been watched by thousands afterwards. So we're not going to deal with yeast dough today. We're going to skip that. The methods, the mixing methods that we're going to talk about today are for quick breads, for cookies, pies, cakes, pastries, not yeast dough products. So let's get started. I can share them with you. The most commonly used is called the creaming method. Now, you've seen me do this a few times just in the last week when we made chocolate chip cookies. Holiday time, I do my Scottish shortbread cookies. You've probably seen that video as well. So the creaming method is for cookies, it's for quick breads, for cakes, things like that. And there are 2 goals in the creaming method. The first is to trap air by creaming fat and sugar together. This is just so important, and I've seen so many people just think, yeah, once the fat and the sugar get wet together, then we're done. You got to incorporate air. The second goal is to create this emulsification between the egg and the fat. So this is very, very important, and these are things that people breeze through. Way more important than what temperature the oven is. So here's how it goes. This is the method for the creaming method. You probably recognize it if you've ever made cookies. First, scale all ingredients precisely. Second, cream the butter and sugar together to incorporate air. It should start to look like soft serve ice cream, very light, very fluffy, right? Then you're going to add an egg slowly, very slowly, to create an emulsification in multiple parts. Add all the dry ingredients, add any extracts, flavorings, nuts, chips, things like that at the end, and there's your creaming method. But because of the air and the egg, this is always going to lead to like a lighter, a softer textured product. And depending on the type of leavener, which we talked about just this weekend, or the amount of leavener and its interaction with the other ingredients, this really should give you the lightest, softest, kind of spongiest texture with quick breads, cookies, things like that. But hey, what if you don't want a light, soft, cakey, spongy texture? What if you want something a little bit more dense, right? A little bit more doughy, a little bit more chewy, something like a biscuit, something more dense, right? Something that could hold up to liquids and not get soggy, like a pie crust. How about something for your afternoon tea, something really sweet and crumbly like a scone? These things, then you need the biscuit method for. And look, I'm talking about the English scone or the American biscuit, right? Not the New Zealand or Australian biscuit, not the British biscuit, which we call a cookie in the United States. It gets a little complicated, but look, I digress. The biscuit method is different than the creaming method because this time, rather than fat and sugar, this time you cut the fat into the flour. And when you surround flour with fat molecules, what you do is slow down the gelatinization of starches. What it does is it chokes the flour's ability to absorb liquids and swell. And this is why you get a much more dense product. This is why you can also create flaky products in pastries or those layers in the biscuits that you love so much. So the biscuit method goes like this. Scale all ingredients precisely. You're going to see a theme here. And then cut the fat into the flour with your paddle attachment, or grandma did it with blades or knives or bench scrapers. And you cut larger pieces for a flaky dough, and you cut smaller pieces for a mealy dough, depending on what kind of pie filling or what kind of texture you want. This is an entire class in web cooking classes, the difference between flaky and mealy. And then you go ahead and add any liquid ingredients you have. If there are liquid ingredients, you add that to the fat and flour mix. And this type of dough needs to be kneaded. This type of dough needs to be thrown around a bit to develop gluten, further combine the ingredients, and start to set the structure of the dough. This type of dough is usually rolled out and cut, like scones, like biscuits, the things that we talked about. Now, cakes, cookies, biscuits, scones, they're all very, very nice. They're a little bit more flaky, you know, a little bit more cakey in some reasons. But how about something really wet and dense? You know, what if you want to get just a brownie, right? The wet, gooey, dense brownie. What about a perfect blueberry muffin, right? That's soft inside, like you break it open, soft inside, moist. Those blueberries are just sitting there. They're not streaked all over the place. They haven't exploded. If you want to do this type of baked good, you need the muffin method. And, you know, really the great thing about the muffin method is you don't need any talent at all for the muffin method. There isn't even a goal in the muffin method. There's no mixing goal other than creating a consistent batter. If you can mix stuff up, you can do the muffin method, because the muffin method's unique characteristic is that it uses liquid fats. usually melted butter, but a lot of times a vegetable oil. A lot of times you see vegetable oil or corn oil in some of these mixes, box mixes. This is why the liquid fat or the oil often weighs products down, and it's so much harder for a leavener to work, right? It's so much harder for moisture to evaporate. It's so much more difficult for flour to absorb liquids when the fat is liquid. So this method, this is the simplest method. And as a matter of fact, this method is so simple, it's the method of choice for your easy bake oven. Did you have one of these as a kid? Right? It came with the little tiny mixes. You mix the batter, the little tiny batter in a little tiny bowl with some water, always called for vegetable oil. And then you went ahead and baked your cake with a light bulb. with a light bulb. It was genius. Brilliant. I love it. It taught a lot of kids how to bake. So here's the muffin method for those of you still keeping score at home and taking notes or taking screenshots of all this. Step 1, what do you think it is? Scale all your ingredients precisely. You're right, you guessed it. Step 2, combine all those ingredients until thoroughly mixed. That's it. Really simple. All right, let's talk about cakes now. Look, if you've ever made an angel food cake, a souffle, if you've ever made chocolate mousse, although it's not a baked item, you've used a sponge method. And the sponge method uses a whipped up egg foam to incorporate air and set the structure of the item. Sometimes it's a whole egg foam, sometimes it's an egg yolk foam, sometimes it's an egg white foam, but the entire goal in this is to capture air in the whipped egg entirely. If you've ever had an angel food cake fall or a souffle fall, you know that it just lets all the air out. So this is a sponge method, and the sponge method goes like this. Step 1 is scale all the ingredients precisely. Step 2, you're going to whip warmed eggs, sugar, and salt to create a foam. We've talked about this a few times this week. 110 degrees Fahrenheit is the best temperature for warming eggs for a foam, for warming eggs to making icings, for warming eggs for popovers. 110 degrees Fahrenheit is the thing that's, 43 Celsius, I think, somewhere around there. They accept air best. It's best for leavening. So I've seen it. You can either warm your eggs over a double boiler, or in warm water. But I've also seen people warm the sugar in an oven. And this is an interesting thing. So the sugar is warmed, you pour it into your eggs, you whip up warmed sugar into the eggs. It's wild. It gives you a poof, really. It gives you some leavening. Next, add any liquid, if there is any in your formula, then add all the dry ingredients together. But here's the thing, a sponge method cake has got to be baked right away because that foam is going to continue to lose air as soon as you start adding the other ingredients to it. As soon as you fold flour into an egg foam, it starts to deflate. So right into the oven with a sponge method cake. They can't sit around. If you want to get really fancy now, okay, if you want to get even fancier than a sponge method, if you want to challenge yourself with your mixer, if you want to get as much fat into a cake as possible, then you're going to need the chiffon method. And chiffon cakes and angel food cakes are both based on egg white foams. Angel food, some people say it's a method unto itself, but really angel food is a chiffon method just without the chiffon. So I guess it is a method unto itself, but I'm not going to cover it today. Angel food method is a chiffon method without the chiffon, which I'll explain. The chiffon cake uses a batter. The batter is pre-made of flour, egg yolks, usually in oil, vegetable oil, and water that's then folded into the egg white foam. So chiffon cakes being this much heavier, they need a leavening agent now, right? Because all the stuff is weighing it down. So it's another difference between chiffons and angel food cakes because chiffon cakes normally get a baking powder or a baking soda if there's an acidic ingredient in there, depending on the other ingredients. So this cake, it may seem as light as an angel food cake after it's cooked, but it has a lot more fat to it. And the Chiffon method goes this way. Here's the method. Step 1, say it with me, scale all ingredients precisely by weight, preferably, not by volume. And the next thing you do is you make a batter out of the oil, the yolks, the water, the flavoring, the flours. Throw everything into this batter and then whip egg whites to soft peaks. You fold the batter and the foam together to make a chiffon. Again, an angel food cake, there just is no batter to it. But because of the foam, this cake, again, is going to need to meet the heat right away. It's going to start deflating right away. Just think of chiffon as really the richer cousin of an angel food cake. And if you're looking for a new way to do your angel foods, look into chiffon. It's really cool. All right, so look, here's the idea, the big idea that I want to stick in your head today as you continue your baking this week. We already know that there are only 7 ingredients that you need to worry about. So let's not worry for now about what you are going to bake. It doesn't matter what you want to bake. Find yourself a formula that you like for muffins, for cookies, for brownies, for scones, for biscuits, whatever you consider a biscuit to be. Go find a formula that you like for one of those things. Pardon. And then look at how they are telling you to mix them together. Never mind about the list of ingredients. How are they doing this? Look at how they're telling you. And now you're going to recognize the creaming method right away if they tell you to mix butter and sugar together in the second step. The first step being scale your ingredients precisely. Or you're going to notice the biscuit method immediately if they say to mix the flour and the fat together. You might be reading one of these formulas and go, aha, Muffin Method. It's calling for melted fat and everything to just be tossed together. See, you've already learned today. You've already learned 3 methods, the difference between the methods. So once you can identify which of these methods is being used in one of your favorite formulas, go ahead and change it. Just change the method. Keep the ingredients, change the method. Where have you heard that before? Take that brownie formula and instead of using melted butter, use cold butter and cream it with the sugar first. Creaming method brownie. Boom! What do you think the difference is going to be? Right? You're going to change that brownie from a muffin method to a creaming method. Well, I won't ruin it. I'll let you do it and tell me what the difference in that brownie is. Those blueberry muffins that you've been making with the creaming method, creaming butter and sugar together first, try melted butter in your muffins. See what happens. Do you want cakier scones? Right? Scones made with a biscuit method? Try a creaming method. You're going to get a cakier product. Ooh, I ruined that one. All right. You're going to start looking at these baking formulas entirely different from now on. You're not only going to recognize the role that the ingredients play, like the baking soda, you know, that's the leavener, the eggs, that's the protein structure, the flour gets moist and swells, but look, you're going to be able to recognize the method that you're using to bring them together. Swap out those methods and you've got an entirely new product. But next, what happens? So what does happen during the baking process? And how, now that you've got better control over your mixing, how can you control that even better? So let's go through this really quickly, because if you're a carefree cook, if you're a lifetime member of web cooking classes, you've probably heard this before, just in another form. So let's bring it all together. Let's fully understand that thing that we're about to put into the oven. We've used a combination of the 7 ingredients. We've chosen the appropriate mixing method for those ingredients. We put it in the right pan, and now it's time to meet the heat. So here's what happens. First is the formation of gases. The gases that are responsible for leavening your product are released by the yeast or the baking soda or the baking powder or the steam. And as the gases are heated, they expand, and they leaven your product. The next thing is the gases get trapped. As the gases are formed and they start to expand from the heat, they're trapped in a stretchable network formed by the proteins in the dough. Sometimes it's gluten, sometimes it's egg protein, but look, without the protein, the gases would just escape and you would have a flat, unleavened product. Next thing is gelatinization of starches. As the starches start to absorb the liquids and expand, your product becomes firmer. Then comes coagulation of proteins. At this point, the proteins are starting to solidify when they get hot enough. And this is the process that gives you the structure of the baked item. And here, actually in this step, this is where the baking temperature does become really important, because if the temperature is too high, coagulation starts before the gases form. And this gives you a brick with a split crust in the top, right? Have you ever gotten that one split crust in the top? Well, that's where the gas eventually escaped through this one big hole, like with a brick laying on top of it, right? But if the temperature is too low, the proteins may not coagulate. So there's no structure for the gases to lift. So they escaped and the product really just lays there on the bottom of the pan, lifeless, right? Like nothing ever happened to it. You look down and it's like you never even baked it. And what you never got to was the evaporation of moisture. This actually takes place throughout the entire process. So it doesn't need a specific spot. The item continually loses moisture. But what most home bakers don't realize is how much moisture is lost in baking, and how it steals size and volume from your baked goods is a big problem in the bake shop, especially if you sell things by the pound. And look, this is a whole nother lesson. I don't need to get into it. But if you put a pound or let's say a half kilo of bread dough into the oven, you're only going to get about 80% of that weight back out, right? You actually need a dough that weighs 18 ounces to get a 16-ounce loaf. But again, another story. Next is melting of shortening. Different fats and different shortenings, they melt. They release trapped gases at this point, but they all do it at different temperatures. So this is why the type of fat used in baking is so important. Some of them hold a lot of air and some don't. Lastly, this is the one you're familiar with because this is the one you watch more than anything else. In the oven door, right? Crust formation and browning. This is the caramelization of sugars in baking. The sugars can come from the batter or dough, but the sugars can also come from an egg wash, can come from milk or even a sugar wash on top of your baked good for browning. All right, lastly, so you get the idea of the process now. That's why the 7 ingredients are so important, because they all fire at a certain point, and how you control that in your mixture gives you success or not. Lastly, I promised I would talk about baking temperatures, even though you can't trust your oven at all. So here's the key to some of your baking temperatures, and it's simply this: focus on the leavener. Why is the baking temperature important? To set the structure, yes. To evaporate moisture, yes. But ultimately, it's to fire the leavener. Without the leavener doing its thing, you don't have much. And whatever the leavening agent is, that's going to tell you how quickly you need to get that thing rising up in the oven. Quick breads, cookies, things that are using a chemical leavener like baking soda, they need a little bit more time in the oven. Okay, the leavener needs a little more time. And a lot of times it's not the heat that's leavening your cookies, it's the chemical reaction. So these quick breads, these often creaming method breads, they're baked around 350 degrees Fahrenheit or about 177 degrees Celsius. But yeast breads are entirely different. The yeast, it needs the heat. It needs heat to expel even more carbon dioxide. And one of the best lifts that a loaf of yeast bread can get is called oven spring. Oven spring is the first thing you get in the oven. Oven spring is the last dying breath of the yeast, like, and they die, right? And you need a high temperature to do that. That was a dramatic recreation of yeast dying. You'll see that in my one-man show when Broadway reopens. Thank you. But look, that's why yeast in leavened breads, or yeast leavened breads, they're baked around 400 degrees, 425, about 200 degrees Celsius. They need more temperature. And then there are the mechanically leavened items, like the popovers that we did on Sunday, like Yorkshire puddings and beignets and some donuts and things. And since they're leavened by steam, this makes sense, right? We need this to happen really quickly. Those egg foams we talked about just a minute ago, we need them to whoop as quick as possible. And that's why my popovers, the egg foams, the angel food cakes, they're usually baked at about 450 degrees or higher, 232 degrees Celsius, because we need to build up that steam engine and raise the roof on these things. That's the whole idea. A lot of flaky pastries like croissants, they need this high temperature as well for quick leavening, quick browning, while still staying soft and tender, because you won't want croissants baking for a period of time where they get really tough and chewy. So look, the less your leavener needs the heat, the less heat you need to give it. The less the leavener needs your heat, the less heat you need to give it. Everything else in the baking process is going to happen naturally. Everything else is going to happen on its own. It's going to stiffen. It's going to dry out. It's eventually going to get brown. But how fast this happens is dictated by the leavening agent. That's the entire idea. I have just shown you the path to understanding baking at a professional level. I know it was quick. You could study this for years, but it's the way that I understand what happens when I choose ingredients. It's the way I understand how to mix them in a certain way. It's the way I understand how to bake them at the best temperature. It's the way cooking was taught to me in culinary school, and now it's the way that I want to pass on to you. If you know your 7 ingredients, if you know your basic mixing methods, if you pick your oven temperature based on the leavener, you'll be able to fix any cooking problem. And that's what baking is all about, Charlie Brown. Don't you love that? That's what baking is all about, Charlie Brown. Hey, let's go to the true or false this week, since vaccines and medicines are in the news so much. Should you start making your own penicillin from the blue cheese in your refrigerator? No. No, don't do that. Penicillin isn't going to help you anyway. This is entirely false. It's an entirely different type of fungus. It is in the penicillin family of fungi. I don't know if they're fun or not, but a fungus is the same one that makes blue cheese, gorgonzola, Stilton, but it's in the penicillin family, but it's called Roquefort, and that's where Roquefort cheese come from. Oh, darn French, they invented everything. No, that's not true, actually. I say that a lot, but blue cheese, this Roquefort, was actually first identified in 1906 by an American microbiologist named Charles Thom, T-H-O-M. And Thom is a cheese unto itself. It's one of my favorite cheeses, and in looking this up, I'm now obsessed with the derivation of cheese names, so maybe we'll talk about that on another Carefree Cook's Code. Look, if you know someone who could use the keys to the concepts behind baking and has about 32 minutes to spend at their computer, please like and share this video with them, and you know what? Maybe they'll share some of their awesome baked goods with you in return. Look, food is getting really dear lately, and let's make sure that your latest grocery delivery doesn't spoil more quickly. Let's make sure things don't go bad before you get to cook them. And that's why I've decided to bring back one of my most popular free classes this week to help you protect your investment in valuable food these days. It's called How to Cook Fresh, Seasonal Ingredients to Create Nutritious Meals in 5 Simple Steps. And this is the class where I share the 5-step plan that I use in my own home to select what I'll eat, protect it so it doesn't spoil quickly, and use herbs and spices to jazz it up. Herbs and spices to jazz it up. Look, you can pre-register for this week's free online web class and find a time that's most convenient for you at webcookingclasses.com/5-step plan. So until next Tuesday, everyone, where we're going to take even more steps toward breaking the Carefree Cooks Code, this is Chef Todd Moore reminding you that there's a method to your baking success. See you soon, everyone. Bye-bye.